There is an old man on a rock in the middle of the sea, and the rock is black. You would not pick this place to end a life. The stone is volcanic sharp, underfoot the color of cooled ash. The wind comes off the Aegean with salt in it and never really stops. There are no soft places to sit. At night, the water is loud, and the man sitting there, wrapped against the cold, is the last one left. He knew the others. He watched most of them die. He is somewhere in his 80s or his 90s now, and every man he once walked dusty roads beside is gone. Crucified, beheaded, stoned, speared. He is the last living person on earth who looked Jesus of Nazareth in the eye. His name is John, and Rome has put him here on this island called Patmos to be forgotten. He will not be forgotten because on this rock, the loneliest man alive is about to be handed a vision so large it explains every book that was ever written before him. We will get to what he saw, but not yet. First, you need to know why almost everyone opens the last book of the Bible the wrong way. Most people come to Revelation looking for the future. They come hunting for beasts and numbers and the end of the world. They treat it like a locked box of horrors, a code to crack a chart, to draw on a whiteboard. And so, they miss the one thing the book actually tells you about itself in its very first word. In the original language, the book is not called Revelation, the way we hear it like a thunderclap of doom. The Greek word is Apokalypsis. And Apokalypsis does not mean destruction. It means unveiling. It means pulling the cloth off something that was already there. Picture a statue under a sheet, finished, complete, waiting. Apokalypsis is the hand that lifts the sheet. So here is what most people miss. Revelation does not mainly point forward. It points backward. It reaches all the way back to the first 3 chapters of the entire Bible, and it picks up 4 loose threads that have been hanging unanswered for the whole story. This is not a book about beasts. This is not a book about numbers. This is not a book about the end of the world. This is a book about the end of the curse. Here is the claim this whole video is built on, and I want you to hold it in your hands while we go. The Bible opens in a garden and closes in a garden. In its 3rd chapter, 4 doors are slammed shut, locked, and guarded. And then, for 63 books, those doors stay closed. Nobody opens them. Nobody can. Until the last book, 22 chapters. And every one of those chapters is cut like the teeth of a key to fit a lock that Genesis left hanging. The tree, the river, the curse, the serpent. 4 doors closed in the beginning. 4 doors opened at the end. And once you see how Revelation turns those locks, the whole Bible stops being 66 separate books on a shelf and becomes one story told by one author who knew the ending before you ever read the beginning. So let's go back to where the doors first closed. Let's go back to the garden. Go back to the beginning, the very beginning. The Bible opens not with a temple, not with a law, not with a king. It opens with a garden. God plants it himself, the text says, and into the middle of it, he puts a tree. In Hebrew, it is called the Etz Chaim, the tree of life. And the deal is almost too simple to believe. The man and the woman may eat from it. They may live. There is no wall around it, no sword in front of it. The way to life is wide open, and they walk past it every single day. Hold on to that picture, an open path to the tree of life, because it does not stay open. You know the story, or you think you do. There is another tree and a voice that should not be trusted in a choice. And the moment the fruit is eaten, something tears, not just inside them, inside the world. And God does something at the end of Genesis chapter 3 that the Bible never undoes, not for the next 63 books. Listen to the last verse of that chapter. God drives the man out, and then he stations cherubim, fearsome living creatures, and a flaming sword that turns every way to guard the way to the tree of life. That is the first door, and it slams shut. Feel the weight of that. The way back to life is now blocked by fire and by angels with a blade that never stops moving. You cannot sneak past it. You cannot climb over it. The tree is still there, life is still there, but the road to it is sealed. Door 1. The tree of life locked behind a flaming sword. Now here's the second door, and most people read right over it. 2 verses earlier before the fall, the writer pauses to mention something almost in passing. A river. A river went out of Eden, the text says, to water the garden. Cool water in a dry land. A river that made the whole place live. And then watch this, the river vanishes from the story. Adam and Eve walk out of the garden and the river stays behind the locked gate. For the rest of the Bible, God's people will wander through deserts. They will run out of water in the wilderness. They will cry out thirsty in the Psalms. And the reader who is paying attention keeps wondering whatever happened to that river. Where did the water go? That is door 2. The river of life lost behind the gate, and it aches if you let it. Something good was there, and now it is gone, and the people who needed it most never get to drink from it again. But before you grieve too long, Genesis does something strange. In the middle of the curse, God plants a promise. Here is what most people miss about Genesis chapter 3. It is not only a story about losing. Right there, while he is speaking judgment over the serpent, God says 6 words that will hang over the entire rest of Scripture like a sentence waiting to be carried out. He says the offspring of the woman will bruise the serpent's head. Read that again. The serpent has just won. He has just talked 2 human beings out of paradise. And in his moment of victory, God leans down and tells him someone is coming who will crush your skull. The villain is introduced and condemned in the same breath. We just do not know yet who the crusher is or when or how. That is door 3, and it is different from the others. The first 2 doors are losses. This one is a promise, a debt. The serpent's head marked for crushing on a day not yet named. And there is a 4th door hanging over all of it. When the man and woman are sent out, the ground itself is cursed for their sake. Thorns, thistles, sweat, pain, death, finally dust returning to dust. The whole creation is bent now, groaning, working against the people who are meant to tend it. Door 4, the curse on the ground. The shadow every human being since has lived under, whether they could name it or not. So count them with me. 4 doors all closed in the first 3 chapters of the Bible. The tree of life locked behind a sword. The river of life lost behind the gate. The serpent promised a crushing but not yet crushed. The curse laid on the ground and on everything that walks it. And now the strange part. The part that should bother you if you have ever read the Bible straight through. For 63 books, nobody opens these doors. Abraham does not. He gets a promise, but he dies still waiting. Moses does not. He leads people to the edge of a land flowing with milk and honey, but it is not Eden, and he never even sets foot in it. David does not. He builds a kingdom and writes songs aching for God's presence, but the sword still turns in front of the tree. The prophets do not. Isaiah catches glimpses of a day when the wolf lies down with the lamb, but it stays a glimpse, a hope of someday. Generation after generation walks past the locked garden. They plant their own gardens. They dig their own wells. They die and they are buried in the cursed ground, and the doors stay shut. The whole Old Testament is a people living outside a locked Eden, holding a promise they cannot cash, waiting for someone with the right key. So, who has it? Before we find out who holds the key, do me one quick favor. If you are tracking these 4 doors with me, if the locked garden is starting to bother you the way it bothers me, then take 1 second and subscribe. This channel walks straight through the Bible like this, one thread at a time. And I do not want you to miss where these doors finally open. And while you're down there, here's a question to sit with as we go. Of the four, the tree, the river, the curse, the serpent, which one would you most want opened in your own life? Hold your answer. By the end, you may want to change it. Now, back to the key. The man who holds the key is the one on the rock. Come back to Patmos. Come back to John Old, an exile sitting on that black volcanic stone with the wind off the sea. Because what happens to him next is the moment the cloth gets pulled off the entire Bible. Remember the word, Apokalypsis, unveiling. Picture the hand reaching for the sheet over the statue. On the island on what John calls the Lord's Day, a voice comes from behind him like a trumpet. He turns, and the sheet begins to lift. He starts to see not random monsters, not a code. He starts to see the other side of Genesis, the same images, turned around, the locks beginning to move. But before we follow what he saw, stay with me, because you need to know this was not a dream a comfortable man had in a comfortable bed. John was a real man on a real island, and we can prove it. There is a writer named Irenaeus, born around the year 130. Irenaeus learned the faith from a man named Polycarp, and Polycarp knew John, the actual John. So when Irenaeus writes that this vision was seen near the end of the reign of the Emperor Domitian, you are not holding a legend passed through 100 fuzzy hands. You are holding a memory 2 handshakes away from the apostle himself. There is another writer, Eusebius, the great church historian. He records the same thing, that John was banished to Patmos under Domitian and later released and went home to the city of Ephesus, an old man. So why was he there? Here is the part that makes the whole book bleed. The Emperor Domitian wanted to be called a god. He liked the title, Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. And across the empire, you could keep your life by saying the words, just call Caesar Lord, just drop the pinch of incense. That was all. And there were people who would not say it. One of them has a name in this book. In the letters at the front of Revelation to the city of Pergamum, Jesus mentions a man called Antipas and calls him my faithful witness who was killed among you. A real believer, a real death, not a symbol. A man who would not call Caesar Lord in a city the text calls the place where Satan's throne is, and it cost him everything. And lest you think Rome was only stern, remember what the historian Tacitus wrote about an earlier emperor Nero, who covered Christians in pitch and set them on fire to light his garden at night. That is the world this book was written into. That is who was reading it first. Not theologians with highlighters, terrified people in 7 small cities wondering if faithfulness was going to get them burned. To people like that, the unveiling begins. And here is what John sees at the center of it all. Here is the part nobody expects. He is told to look because the Lion of the tribe of Judah has won. The Lion, the conqueror. He turns to see the lion roaring on the throne, and there is no lion. There is a lamb, and not a strong, healthy lamb. The Greek word is arnion, a little lamb, a small one, and it is standing as though it had been slain. A lamb with the wounds of its own death still on it, alive at the very center of heaven. Let that land. At the dead center of the universe on the throne is not a beast of teeth and rage. It is a slaughtered little lamb standing up. The strength that runs all of reality looks up close like a wound that would not stay dead. And now the doors start to move, because watch who shows up next. Deeper into the vision, a great red dragon appears, and John does not leave you guessing who it is. He tells you flat out, this is that old serpent called the devil, That old serpent, the same one. The voice from the garden, the one God promised to crush back in Genesis chapter 3, walks back onto the page by name. The villain from the first 3 chapters of the Bible is the villain of the last. The whole story, it turns out, has only ever had one enemy. And here is what most people miss about the dragon. He does not win. The vision shows him thrown down, defeated. The crushing that God promised in the garden, the bruised head that has been hanging unpaid for 63 books. The key is in the lock, and it is starting to turn. Now look at what Jesus says to those 7 frightened churches over and over like a drumbeat. To the believers in Ephesus, in Smyrna, in Pergamum, where Antipas died, he keeps repeating one promise to the one who overcomes. The Greek word is nikao, to conquer, to overcome. And here is the beautiful reversal hidden in it. The Lamb conquered by being slain. And now, the people who follow him conquer the same way, not by burning their enemies like Nero, but by staying faithful even when faithfulness costs them their lives. To the one who overcomes, Jesus says to the one who conquers, I will give to eat of the tree of life. Did you catch it? Did you feel the door move? The tree, the Etz Chaim, the tree that has been locked behind a flaming sword since the 3rd chapter of Genesis, untouchable for the whole Bible. Jesus just promised it back. To frighten people in small cities under a cruel emperor, the one who held the sword in front of the tree is now handing out fruit from it. The sword is coming down. The hand that closed the door is the hand reaching for the key. And this is where it gets remarkable, because John is not finished. He has shown you the lamb named the serpent promised the tree, but he has not yet shown you the room where all 4 doors swing open at once. He has not yet shown you the river. He has not yet shown you the end of the curse. He has not yet shown you the city coming down out of heaven like a bride dressed for her husband. He is about to. And when he does, the loneliest man alive, the exile on the black rock, the last of the 12, is going to be shown the least lonely ending that has ever been written. But first, there are 7 letters in his hand, and 7 frightened churches waiting to read them. But before the doors swing fully open, look closer at who these letters were written to. Because the 7 churches were not 7 ideas. They were 7 real towns on a real Roman road. And the messenger carrying this scroll would have walked from one to the next in a rough circle through the province of Asia in what is now Western Turkey. 7 small congregations of frightened people. And to each one, Jesus hands a different piece of the garden. Start with Smyrna, a wealthy port city and a poor little church inside it. Jesus says something almost unbearable to them. I know your poverty, he says, but you are rich. He does not promise to make their suffering stop. He warns them it is about to get worse, that some of them are going to prison, that faithfulness may cost them their breath. And then he hands them this, be faithful unto death, and I will give you a crown of life. The one who overcomes, he says, will not be hurt by the second death. To a church staring down execution, the promise is not safety. It is a life that death cannot reach. Move up the road to Pergamum. This is the city where Antipas died, the one Jesus calls the place where Satan's throne is. A city soaked in emperor worship, where saying the wrong thing about Caesar could end you. And to the people still living in that shadow, Jesus promises hidden manna, bread from heaven. The food God rained down in the wilderness when his people were starving, and a white stone with a new name written on it that no one knows but the one who receives it. In a city that knew them only as troublemakers and traitors to Rome, Jesus promises each of them a name that is entirely secretly theirs. Here is what most people miss about these 7 letters. Every promise is a fragment of Eden coming back. Look at the pattern once you see it. To Ephesus, The very first church, the promise is the tree of life. The Etz Chaim door, number 1, offered right there in chapter 2. To Smyrna, life that outlasts death. To Pergamum, the bread of heaven and a new name. The key is not turning in one lock. It is turning in 7 at once. Keep going. To Thyatira, a church tempted to compromise to go quietly along with the idol feasts so business stayed easy. Jesus promises the morning star, the bright herald that means the long night is finally ending. To Sardis, a church with a reputation for being alive, while it was quietly dying inside, he says something that should make any of us sit up. You have a name that says you live, but you are dead. And yet even to them, even to the spiritually asleep, he holds out white garments and a promise that their name will not be erased from the book of life. The door is not even shut on the church that fell asleep. Then comes Philadelphia, and this one is tender. A small church, weak within Jesus' own words, only a little strength, no power, no status, the kind of church the world would never notice. And to that tiny, tired congregation, Jesus says, I have set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. Hold that phrase against everything we have said. 63 books of doors slammed shut and guarded by swords. And to the weakest church on the list, the one with almost nothing left, Jesus says, here is a door no one can ever close again. And to them, he promises something staggering, that they will be made a pillar in the temple of God, and that he will write on them the name of the city, the New Jerusalem, the garden city that is still at this point in the vision coming. And then, last of all, Laodicea, the rich church, the comfortable one, increased with goods, it says, and in need of nothing. The church that had everything, and to it, Jesus says the hardest words in all 7 letters. You are neither cold nor hot, and because you are lukewarm, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. You think you are rich, he tells them, and you do not know that you are wretched and poor and blind and naked. Buy from me gold tried in the fire, he says. And then, even here, even to the church that made him sick, he does not slam the door. He knocks on it. Behold, I stand at the door and knock, he says. If anyone hears my voice and opens, I will come in. 7 churches, 7 fears, 7 locks. And to every one of them faithful or failing frightened or comfortable, the same Jesus holds out the same key and says to the one who overcomes, now hold all 7 of those promises in your hands at once. The tree, the crown, the bread, the new name, the morning star, the open door, a seat on the throne. Because in the final 2 chapters, John is about to see the room where every one of them comes true at the same moment. Stay with me. We are almost at the garden. And now the sheet comes all the way off. In the last 2 chapters of the Bible, John sees a city coming down out of heaven, and it is not what you would expect a city to be. There are no temples in it, no sun, no moon. And then in the very center of it, John sees something that should make every reader who has come this far stop breathing for a second. He sees a river, a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, flowing right out from the throne of God and down the middle of the street of the city. The river, the one that watered Eden and then vanished behind a locked gate in the 2nd chapter of Genesis. The water that God's people thirsted for in the wilderness, that the Psalms ached after, that disappeared from the story for 63 books, there it is, flowing again, out in the open, and anyone who is thirsty can come and drink. Door 2, open, the river of life lost in Genesis found in Revelation. And it gets better because look at what is growing on the banks of that river. The tree, the Etz Chaim, the tree of life, the one that was locked behind a flaming sword since the 3rd chapter of Genesis, the one no human being had been allowed to touch in the entire Bible. It is standing right there by the water, and there is no sword in front of it, no cherubim with a turning blade, no wall. The text says its leaves are for the healing of the nations. The way to the tree of life, sealed off at the beginning of the story, is wide open at the end. You could walk right up to it. Door 1, open, and the flaming sword is nowhere to be found. Then comes the line that closes the door you may not have even realized you were living behind. John writes 5 words about that city, and there shall be no more curse. No more curse. The curse on the ground from Genesis chapter 3, the thorns, the thistles, the sweat, the dust returning to dust gone, lifted. The shadow that has hung over every human being who ever lived, the weight you were born under, whether anyone ever named it for you or not, simply lifted off the world like fog burning off in the morning. Door 4, open, no more curse. And the serpent. The old serpent promised a crushed head back in the garden, the debt that hung unpaid for the whole Bible. He is gone, thrown down, defeated, finished. The bruised head God promised in Genesis chapter 3 is paid in full. The villain who walked the human race out of paradise does not get the last word in the human story. He does not even get the last chapter. Door 3, open, the promise kept. 4 doors slammed shut in the 3rd chapter of the Bible. 4 doors thrown wide open in its final 2. The tree, the river, the curse, the serpent, every single one. And the same God who drove humanity out of the garden in Genesis is the one welcoming them home in Revelation. Now, come back to the rock. Come back to John, the old man on the black volcanic stone, the exile, the last of the 12, the loneliest man alive on a prison island in the middle of the sea. Remember where we started. Remember the wind and the salt and the loud water at night. Here is what the loneliest man alive is shown at the end of his vision. He is shown the city coming down, and a voice says that now the dwelling place of God is with people, that God himself will be with them and wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying. And John writes one small detail that breaks me every time. In the new heaven, in the new earth, he says, there was no more sea. No more sea. The man writing those words is surrounded by sea. The sea is his prison. The sea is the thing that keeps him from the churches he loves, the thing that separates him from everyone, the wide, cold water that put him on this rock and will not let him leave. And he is shown an ending where the thing that separates is simply gone. No more sea, no more distance, no more exile. God with his people, face to face forever. The loneliest man who ever lived was handed the least lonely ending ever written. That is why he was on Patmos, not to be forgotten, to be shown. And here is what I want you to feel, because you have felt it before, even if not about the Bible. You know that moment when you finish a long book, a really good one, and you turn the last page and something clicks and you suddenly realize the first page was pointing here the whole time. That detail in chapter 1 you skipped right over was a key. The thing the author mentioned in passing was the thing the entire story was walking toward. And you want to go back and read it all again, because now you know the author knew the ending before you ever read the beginning. That is what Revelation does to the entire Bible. Go back to the very first chapters and the very last and listen to what God calls himself. I am Alpha and Omega, he says, the first letter and the last, the beginning and the end. He is not telling you he is good at predicting the future. He is telling you he wrote it. The river in Genesis chapter 2 and the river in Revelation chapter 22 were always the same river. The author knew. He always knew. So hold the whole thing in your hands now and see it for what it is. This is not 66 unrelated books on a shelf. This is not a holy library you read in pieces. This is not an old religious text that happens to end with a strange vision. This is one story with one author who opened 4 doors in the beginning so that he could have the joy of opening them again at the end and letting you walk through. The Bible begins in a garden that gets locked. It ends in a garden city where the gates never close. So the next time someone tells you Revelation is the scary book, the one nobody understands, the one full of beasts and bows and numbers, you can tell them the truth. It is the key. Pull it out of the lock and the whole Bible falls open. If this is the first time the last book has made sense to you, subscribe, because this is exactly what we do here. Walk one thread of scripture all the way from Genesis to its end until the loose ends tie shut. And before you go, take 3 things with you. First, the factual one. Revelation is not an appendix. It is not a strange add-on bolted to the back of the Bible. It is the keystone, the piece that holds the whole arch up. Pull it out, and Genesis never resolves. The garden stays locked forever. With it, every door opens. Second, and this one is for you, you do not read Revelation to predict the future. You read it to understand that your own story has an author, one who, like the writer of any great book, already knew the last page when he wrote the first. The mess you are standing in the middle of is not the ending. It is a chapter. And the one holding the pen has already been to the end. And third, the one I want to leave ringing in your ears. Whatever curse you are living under right now, the grief, the diagnosis, the thing that went wrong and never got fixed, the weight you cannot put down, hear what the last chapter of the Bible says over it. There shall be no more curse. Not the curse is fair. Not learn to live with it. No more curse. That is where this whole story is going. And it has been going there since the very first garden. So let me ask you the question I planted at the start. Of the 4 doors, the tree, the river, the curse, the serpent, which one do you most need opened in your own life right now? Tell me below. I read these. The Bible begins in a garden that gets locked. It ends in a garden city where the gates never close. And the key was the last book all along.